I'm Matt, one of the Maybridge staff. Good to be with you today. You might have noticed this is a bit of a different setting. We're doing something a little bit different this Sunday. So rather than being part of a series, we usually do talks on the Bible through a series. This is a one-off, and today we are particularly looking at the issue of social media. How do Christians use and think about social media? Should there be a distinctive way that we do that? And you might be thinking, well, hold on, I don't even use social media. But the fact is, even if you don't at all, everybody around you is. It's just everywhere. And the average person in the UK, I looked this up, the average person in the UK spends 14 hours a week on social media. Our use of social media as a nation, as a people, is absolutely huge. And as Christians, if we don't talk about that and how we might use it best, then we're missing a trick. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this more as a conversation than a talk, so to speak, is I'm not very expert on social media myself. Chloe, who's on our staff team, is probably a lot more expert than I am on this subject. So I just wanted to bring her in and make this more of a conversation than a monologue. Chloe, what is social media?
Okay, well, it sounds pretty obvious, but it's media that allows you to socialise. So we often think about Facebook or Instagram things, and so you might think, oh, well, I'm not on those things, but it includes anything where you're allowed to interact with people or share content. So that's if you've got a WhatsApp group with your family, that counts. Even if you're watching this on YouTube, you're technically on social media right now. YouTube's actually the biggest social media channel there is. So even if you don't think you have a Facebook profile or anything, there's a chance that you're probably using it without thinking, as long as you're talking to somebody online, that's social media.
So we all know that social media, as I said, it's a big thing, and it has an effect on us. It has a number of effects on us, and probably more high profile of the negative effects, and you might know some about those. But like anything, social media is both positive and negative, isn't it? And what would you say are some of the different positive and negative points to it?
Well, I think there's certainly a physical effect it has on us that can be quite negative. So if you look at your phone at night particularly, there's a blue light on your screen, which is actually the same light that's emitted by the sun, I found out recently. So it actually affects the melatonin in your brain. It stops you from getting to sleep, which, as we know, can cause all kinds of health problems.
I think I've experienced that one.
Yeah, and there's also, it just rewires your brain as well. There's a lot actually in how it affects your brain chemistry, and so it really has a real physical effect on you. But then of course there's the emotional stuff that I think we're all aware of, like you're comparing yourself to other people online, and that's not very good for mental health particularly, although the positive side of that is you can connect with people online. There is a sort of give and take with that.
I was just thinking about some of the positives as well, that it can make us more aware of things that are going on in the world, causes and issues that we would not have found out about otherwise because somebody shared them. Apparently I read the study as well, using social media can even improve your memory. So there are a few good things about it, and I think one other thing for me that I really noticed is, and maybe we see this more during lockdown, is that you can connect with people that otherwise would struggle to connect. So people who have disabilities or struggle to get out and about for whatever reason, it's a way of connecting with the world that would not otherwise potentially be available.
Yeah, and I'm actually really grateful that if we had to be in lockdown, it happened in a time in our lives where social media exists. I think we'd all be feeling a lot more disconnected. And I think even moving forward, the way we're doing church digitally is something that we're going to carry on doing, because even if some of us can go back to normal, there will always be people for whom social media is their main bridge into the world, and actually that's a really positive thing that we're all engaging with that more, and there's more content for those people.
I'd say one thing I've noticed recently, and one reason I wanted to have this conversation, is I think I'm seeing a lot more anger and outrage on social media, and it's probably always been there, but I think in recent times it's coming out a lot more, both from Christians and people who would not identify as Christians for a number of reasons. And I think it's just partly worth stepping back and saying, well, what's going on there, and are the particular reasons that people are more angry, and how can we see that, what can we do about that? I think that'd be quite helpful.
Definitely, and I think partly it's just our outlet it's our own little platform where we can vent our frustrations, and I think sometimes, particularly at the moment, we're all feeling a bit frustrated, and I think it's that kind of, we're seeing that through all kinds of posts, not anything to do with this situation.
Just sort of asking yourself, well, what's going on here? Why am I behaving this way, or why are we behaving this way? I think is always a helpful question to ask. Okay, so we broke this up into a few different sort of lines of conversation, and one is to talk about how we share our opinions and thoughts online, and many people are very quick to share what they think about all manner of subjects on social media, and I think, as I said, there's a lot of reasons people might be particularly frustrated or angry about certain things at the moment. I was thinking about this. There's obviously no passage of the Bible that says, here is how to behave on social media.
Be impressed if there was.
Would have been ahead of its time on that front. But I do think there's a good framework in Ephesians chapter 4. So I'm just going to read this out. And it says, don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. And do not bring sorrow to God's Holy Spirit by the way you live. Remember, he has identified you as his own, guaranteeing that you will be saved on the day of redemption. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words and slander, as well as all types of evil behaviour. Instead, be kind to each other, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God, through Christ, has forgiven you. And what I think is significant with this is it's not just random advice about being a nice person. The motivation is what you've already received from God. So that's where, with other people, obviously in real life, but also online as well. And I was just thinking on this passage, imagine if social media didn't have bitterness, rage, harsh words and slander. Imagine if even just the Christians of the world didn't do those things online. What a wonderful difference it would make.
I think that's the thing with social media, is that we forget there's a human being on the other end of the phone. You know, it kind of, you're looking at a screen, you're looking at words in black and white. It's suddenly all the nuances of life and all the sort of emotion and everything that goes into normal relationships, that things you would never normally say to someone's face, suddenly you feel less reserved about doing online, but someone's still going to read that. And so I think it is just helpful to remember that the way you would hopefully interact in that way with real people in real life, you are still interacting with real people.
Yeah, I think sometimes you can forget that it's other people that are reading this if you see some stuff online. Sometimes I see things that are posted and think, you never talk like that in person. What's going on there? And we can forget that it can hurt somebody else the way that we speak online, I think, quite easily. Often, just within this, I think people debate stuff online, and of course that's good, and that's actually really important. But people debate everything from which is the best footballer to which is the best political ideology. And I have to say, most of that sort of arguing feels fairly fruitless to me. I don't ever see people say, yep, you've convinced me, I back down, I changed my mind. And I was thinking about another verse of the Bible around this actually, and it's in 2 Timothy, where the author Paul writes to Timothy, who's this younger Christian, and he has this line, don't have anything to do with foolish and stupid arguments, because you know that they produce quarrels. And what he's saying is, a foolish and stupid argument, so not any argument, but a foolish and stupid argument, I think is like a heated discussion around something that doesn't matter. And he's saying, avoid it, because the danger is it descends into a quarrel, and a quarrel is something more personal. And so you can suddenly have friends fall out because they've got into a big argument about something that really doesn't matter whatsoever. And Paul says, just don't bother. Just stay out of it, steer clear. And do you think there's practical ways that we can do that and see that?
Well, I wonder if it's a case of maybe choosing your battles online. Yeah, being careful maybe about what we put out there and phrasing it in such a way, and only having kind of the healthy debates, because it is important to engage in political stuff, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. And just around the politics, I think politics has become a bigger thing recently. I have to say, it bothers me when I see people turning their faith, or even Jesus himself, into a left versus right thing. And there's a couple of reasons that I think really concerns me. One is the Jesus of the Gospels is involved in politics. He is. You can't avoid that. But he also transcends it. And we should not put all our eggs in the basket of either the right or the left, or however we want to characterise it. Our faith is in him, that he's over and above politics. But secondly, if the way that we talk about politics so associates one point of view with Jesus, or extreme right or extreme left or whatever it may be, it might make people think that's all that Jesus is, and it might put people off engaging with him unnecessarily, and that concerns me too. And I think maybe one way of avoiding that is to be very deliberately charitable to those that we disagree with, and say, I can see where you're coming from, or words to that effect.
Yeah, definitely. I think I don't think there are maybe even 2 Christians on the planet that believe the exact same things, and yet people often speak on behalf of Christianity.
All Christians believe this. Yeah.
And they're like, you don't speak for me, like you do.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think how we talk is perhaps even more important, or certainly as important as what we're actually saying. You can have the correct, you can be right, but you can still put it forward in such a way that no one's going to listen to you because you're not speaking in a very kind way. And like particularly with political stuff, I think it's also important to remember that political stuff is very personal. You know, we think we might be having this sort of theoretical, rational debate, but you're talking about someone's, you know, experience, their identity, their rights, their relationships. There is so much that will affect them on a deep level, and that's why we're getting so heated about it. It's understandable, but then it's important to just remember that you're having a conversation with someone that's something that deeply affects them, even if it doesn't affect you.
That's right. I think, you know, it could be, for example, that if you and I were debating something on Facebook, and I could be thinking about it in a sort of almost academic way, and for you it might be something that's really deep and personal, and then we're at cross purposes because when something is written, you can't read tone in the same way. And again, it you know, it's like treading on eggshells. There's really easy ways that we could hurt one another by not taking that into account when we debate things. I was thinking about another passage of the Bible, and this is in James chapter 3, and it's all about how we use our mouths, our tongues. And he says, people can tame all kinds of animals, birds, reptiles and fish, but no one can tame the tongue. It is restless and evil, full of deadly poison. Sometimes it praises our Lord and Father, and sometimes it curses those who have been made in the image of God. And so blessing and cursing come pouring out of the same mouth. Surely, my brothers and sisters, this is not right. And it's also, you know, when we're using social media, you know, we can be sharing Bible verses and worship songs, and that's all very nice. But if at the same time we're saying nasty things about someone that we don't like because we don't like their politics or something that they think or they've done, it's very inconsistent, and I don't think that could be helpful at all.
I had a friend once who said she prefers to have an argument or a debate over social media rather than in person, because she said it gives her time to think about things and word it carefully. But I think often that's not the case. Normally, you know, you're on your phone while you're cooking dinner or you're chatting to someone else. That's the other problem with social media, is you're often ignoring real life. But you're not really paying your full attention. You're not stopping to often think carefully about what you're saying, and you're just firing off a quick reply. And so there's certainly far less room for nuance in that. There's, you know, you're more apt to just react and respond rather than actually stop, take a breath, try and remember that person's a person, try and see where they're coming from. I think the nature of the phone's dinging us all the time. It is more immediate. We are more instinctive with it. And so that's another practical thing, I think, is just maybe taking a pause before we respond to anything online. I think that could be really helpful. Yeah,
and I think for me as well, part of the dynamic is if you're discussing something person to person, that's very different from a public forum. So I'm always conscious if I'm online and I say something, there's potentially hundreds of people that could see it. And then as soon as it becomes a debate, I know for me, I don't want to look wrong.
That shocks me.
And I think that would be true for a lot of people, that we would not want to back down. And one thought I had on this is we need to remember our identity as Christians is not wrapped up in being right. In fact, quite the opposite. Because of what Jesus did on the cross, we should be the first people to queue up and say, I was wrong. You know, I need to change. I need to be a bit different on this. While standing by things that matter, standing for truth, that's really important. But being able to say within yourself and publicly, I was wrong.
I saw a really interesting quote on Instagram recently. With all the Black Lives Matter stuff happening, it was a Maya Angelou quote, and it was, I'm going to get this wrong now, do your best until you know better, and then do better. And I think a lot of people, particularly with social media, it's a record of everything you've ever said publicly, and if you look back at like 10 years ago what you put on Facebook, you'll probably just wince at how embarrassing it is.
Even 2 years ago.
And I think we're reluctant to admit, actually what I said before was racially insensitive, or whatever it is. And I think we've got this whole thing now where we put people on pedestals, or you've got people like political people that we like to pin all the things we don't like about the one, and we take them down on social media and like, cancel them, cancel that person. I think we have to remember that we're all human beings, and as Christians, we don't believe anyone's perfect, that there are no saints and sinners here, we're all sinners, and that we have to be more just allowing for people to get something wrong. And actually that could be where the social media debate can be helpful, because it's a space to educate people, and and you can say, well, why don't you go away and try this resource, or why have you ever thought about this? And actually, it can be, if we're willing to admit we don't know everything and that we haven't got it right in the past, it can be a very helpful space to do that.
I was also thinking about with this, where we get our opinions from, and we all like to think that we're rational, independent thinkers, but a lot of the research says that it's not quite as simple as that. There's a proverb that I really like, one of my favourite proverbs in the Bible, and it says, it's Proverbs 18 verse 17. It says, "The one who states his case first seems right, until the other comes and examines him." And what it's saying is, there's loads of points of view out there on all sorts of things, and you can hear one and it seems very persuasive and watertight until somebody says, well, hold on a minute, what about this? Or you've not taken this into account, or there's a bit more evidence around this over here. And that's a very good way of forming an argument and forming a view, is to take in different perspectives from particularly people who are expert on a subject. But social media often exposes us to the first person in the argument. For example, if you click on a video and it's all about which ice cream is the greatest in the world, you'll get loads of videos about that ice cream for months and months down the line, and a year later you wouldn't even be able to articulate why anybody would think differently about that ice cream, that it must be the best in the world. Social media is forming how we think, and it's becoming an echo chamber within what the first thing that we looked at, the first thing that we thought, without us even knowing it, and that has to be really worrying for us.
And the dangerous thing is also that we curate, in a sense, what we see on our news feed. So it's partly that thing where the algorithm says, oh, you like videos like this, but it's also if you've got that one weird relative that keeps posting weird things, you're like, oh, you know what, I don't need to see that. You can just easily unfollow them. On Facebook they don't even know you've done it. And you can almost curate your own little bubble of people that think like you, and it's just a lovely little space of like-minded people. And while I think that's understandable, I think we all want to be, we feel comfortable with people who are like us and think like us, and it can be a nice space in that sense. I think that's how we end up, votes going forward, and you thought, I thought everyone was going to vote the way I did, and suddenly, oh no, half the country voted completely differently. We won't get challenged, we won't, we were saying earlier about how social media can educate us about things we didn't know about before, but if your bubble of people on your feed are all the people who look and think like you and have the same experiences, then you're not going to learn anything.
I made a few just points of how practically we might wrestle with some of this, and these are just some of my thoughts. Tell me what you think, Chloe. So one, be charitable to points of view you disagree with, and represent them at their best. Don't pick the stupidest person who has that view. I think, second, be very careful about commenting on the character of another person, especially if you don't know them. And obviously famous people are targets, they just get taken down for the smallest mishap. I think also look at the source of anything that you share on social media.
Oh yeah.
So you might find a great quote, but then you find out that it comes from a white supremacy group or something, then don't share it, and it's very easy to just miss that, but that's, I think, quite important. And I think in terms of how we discuss, just the practical thought would be debate but don't antagonise. If you're serious about persuading people of a point of view, being warm and friendly is likely to be far more effective than being coldly rational or descending into name calling.
Like you catch more flies with honey, that kind of vibe.
Yeah.
As a church, what we share on social media, we try and be careful about what we share because it says something about church and Christians. And
well, I know because you're responsible for that for our church.
Yes, that is my job.
You really think about that through quite deeply.
Yes, although I won't pretend I always get it right, but yeah, you're thinking about who you're representing, and maybe you're only representing you, but Christians were certainly representing other Christians, and I think we just sort of forget that you're building a picture online of what people think about you and people like you, and so maybe just taking more time than we normally would, I think, is quite a helpful way to think of it without going too overboard.
Yeah, I think I heard one little quote that I thought was a really helpful summary of all this, which was, write with clarity, read with charity.
Nice, and it rhymes.
Write with clarity, read with charity. And so, be as clear as you can about what you put out there, think about where it comes from, think about the motivation and so on, and be charitable to what comes in, think the best of people, and be positive towards people as far as you're able.
Just assume everyone's doing their best, I think, is a nice way of putting it.
So another thing that I thought would be good to talk about, and is this issue of, and I think it's massive, is how we do this comparison thing in life. And a lot of us do that even without social media. I think that's always been a thing. But we often compare ourselves to one another, usually with very negative consequences. Why do we do this? You know, the Bible would say we all play this internal game of justifying ourselves. And we hook onto things that make us feel valuable and significant. And, we do it in a million different ways. The difference of social media, I think, seems to be we can show everybody a very specific version of ourselves. And I know for myself, if I took 5 photos of myself, the one that would end up online is the one where I thought I looked the best. I mean, it still might not be great, but it would be the best of a bad bunch, if you see what I mean. And if everybody is doing that, and I suspect a lot of people are, that's going to affect how we see one another and on the world if we're spending all these hours on social media, isn't it?
And it's understandable why we do that, because, if no one needs to see 4 bad photos of you, there's one nice one. But it's someone described it to me once as, on social media, you are comparing everyone else's highlight reel with your bloopers and behind the scenes footage. Like, you're the only person with a full picture of what your day-to-day life is like, but you're only getting snapshots of everyone else's.
It's a good analogy.
And so it's trying to just bear that in mind, in a sense, because people are excited, people want to celebrate, people want to share stuff. And I think you can go too far the other way, where you share everything that's miserable or mundane. But yeah, I guess it is trying to hold that tension that, you're comparing the absolute best bits of someone else's life with the rest of your life, and everyone has got that rubbish, back behind the scenes footage that we just don't get to see.
I think social media has really led to the profile of the humble brag.
Oh yeah.
Humble brag, when somebody says, "I can't believe I just had dinner with Stormzy again," stuff like that, where it's clearly acknowledge me. Notice that I've got something significant going on in my life. Or you get the person, it's the lifestyle stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
Here's my holiday picture of me. I'm on a beach in the Bahamas doing yoga. There's my protein shake, and my new MacBook just happens to be in shot. And it's a curated version of life that we're sort of trying to project. Everything's brilliant for me, and why are we doing that? What is that about?
Well, I think partly it is just we're excited and that looks nice, I'll take a photo of it, but partly I think there is a sort of a validation in it, where you're sort of promoting, oh look how great my life is. It's a kind of you just want to feel better, and you want to feel like you're interesting and that you matter. If people are liking it and commenting and going, oh happy anniversary, have a lovely day, and you're just like, you want that sort of, it's a constant feed of like love and validation that I think is so intoxicating on social media. It's quite seductive to have people, but then when you post something and then no one likes it or comments, suddenly you feel like, oh, my life is terrible.
There's a dopamine effect on a neurological thing in the brain, where you are looking for the reward, so to speak, in your brain of people liking things about your life and what you do. And again, that's always been there, but now social media just magnifies our ability to do that.
Yeah, and even after that little dopamine hit, then there's the come down afterwards, because it hasn't really solved anything. It hasn't validated you in any real way. So then we end up just chasing it more and more, and it's kind of a vicious cycle in that way.
Ephesians 2 has this wonderful line. It says, "For we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus." If you go about this life in the knowledge that you are God's masterpiece, not arrogantly, because everybody else is God's masterpiece too, it should shield you, surely, against the virus of comparison.
One of the things I've seen online that I do think is actually helpful is like making gratitude lists, or remembering to thank God for all the things in your life that you are grateful for. But remembering that people are God's masterpiece is actually helpful with some of the stuff we were talking about earlier. Actually, we did this in our Heaven series recently. We'll try and put a link in the video description. But where we were talking about how in heaven there'll be people all different diversities, all different tribes, and actually when you're, if you're hateful towards someone who's different from you, you're actually hateful to a version of God that you just aren't represented by yourself.
Each and every person we interact with online is a masterpiece of God, just the same as each of us individually. And that's got to be the thing that shapes how we interact with the whole thing well, hasn't it? So moving on a little bit, I want to talk about what I think most of us are looking for when we use social media, and I think that's why is it so popular? I think it's the heart of it is the desire for connection with other people. We love the feeling that we're not alone and that we're connected to other people, and that's fine. Obviously, we do need other people, and that's a good thing. But I would say some of the people that I think I observe being really active on social media are also the people that I observe as being quite keen on having more social connection, people that maybe are experiencing a bit more loneliness and isolation, and it can become a way of meeting, sometimes maybe a healthy way of meeting that, but I think quite often an unhealthy way of meeting that as well.
Well, yeah, I think particularly at the moment we're all very aware of how social media is bridging the gap, like we were saying earlier, but that, for all this talking to each other we're doing, all these Zoom meetings we're having, all this like WhatsApping, we're still desperate to get together. We're still desperate to meet up in people's gardens. We're suddenly more aware than ever. I think that being in person is just different to being online. Like it's just not the same. I think it's something as a world we're now finally kind of registering that actually we need to be in real community, and there's just some things that you just can't get from your phone.
In John's second letter in the New Testament, he's an old man at this point, and he writes to a church and he says, "I have much more to say to you, but I don't want to say it with paper and ink, for I hope to visit you soon and talk with you face to face, and then our joy will be complete." Really interesting. And obviously letters were the social media of the day, or as close to. It's how you would put yourself and your views into a room when you weren't there. And in this letter, it's obviously a significant letter, it made it into the Bible, so it's a good letter. And John says still, I want to be with you in person. I want to be with you in person. And it's not just that he's saying, I want to be with you in person so I can instruct you further. He's saying, I want to be with you in person so that our joy will be complete. There's something about the real life, tangible, being with other people that really matters. And that's probably why we find lockdown frustrating, is we're supposed to be physically around other people. We need it, don't we?
Yeah. We talk about the Trinity. God actually exists in relationship with God the Father and Jesus the Son and the Holy Spirit, and I'm not going to try and explain it any more detail than that, but in the same way that we are made in the image of God and we're his masterpiece, that our relationships reflect a God that lives in relationship with himself.
Absolutely right, yeah. That God is community somehow, in a way that's very hard to understand, but he is. It's interesting as well, you think about how this applies with technology. Before I started working at Maybridge, I did 13 years doing student ministry, and one of the big changes I noticed over those years was obviously that's when the smartphone came in. I think I observed a drop in the ability of people to form relationships well, and just the basic stuff of relational skills, asking questions, being interested in somebody, learning about what they think, dialoguing, and all of the richness that comes through that sort of relationship. I think people increasingly have thought, well, I'll get all that. The shortcut to that is to just do it online. And yet I would say that the huge increase in depression and anxiety and loneliness in the last 10 to 20 years, I think has to be tied to that, is that we've basically been hoodwinked. We think we're getting intimate relationships quickly and easily through doing it through social media, when actually it's not replacing the exact thing that we need, which is real life, flesh and blood relationships.
Absolutely, and I think social media can work to enhance some of that stuff. There's things I know about people that I wouldn't have learned if I hadn't just seen a Facebook status and go, oh, you saw Hamilton last night too. And as a church, obviously we have social media, we're not saying it's one or the other, but I think as we've seen, we will probably be continuing digital church forever, but how we meet in person is just not matched, like we were saying. It's just not the same as when you're online, and it can add to that, it can add to the conversation, it can promote more what we're doing, and build relationships like in the week when we're not all gathered together, but it's kind of an add-on rather than the be-all and end-all of it.
Yeah, it seems to me like it's a tool that if you use it well can enhance your relationships, and the danger is when we use it to replace them or try and shortcut them and do them more easily somehow.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't work that way at all. Okay, so another section I just wanted to sort of have a bit of a conversation about is thinking positively. How can we use social media positively as individuals, maybe as a church as well? what would be some tips for how we positively go about using it?
I think, well, we've covered some of them already, you know, like pausing before we speak, think about how we talk about people, and, you know, being, clarity, but charity. But one thing I've realised, since my niece has recently followed me on Instagram, she's 12, and I have all these sort of conversations with her in person. I'm always very careful about, like, you know, bigging her up, you know, promoting like girl power and all this kind of stuff. And I've been aware recently that now I'm posting things, if I say anything sort of self-deprecating for a laugh on social media about myself, suddenly she's seeing, you know, she's going to be seeing that, and she's going to be seeing how I'm doing that. And so actually being a role model online, I think, is a good way of you know, promoting ideas and thinking about who's watching it and what are they actually going to be taking away from that for themselves. So with our social media account, that is our mini platform. We all have a voice on social media now, and that's lovely. And it can help us to amplify other voices of people who don't normally get heard. But we're thinking about who's seeing it and how you can use that as a sort of force for good in the world.
I think also in a positive way, using social media to promote things of God. And that doesn't just mean nice Bible verses, although it can mean that. It's promoting things of beauty, things that are praiseworthy that people have done. All of the good stuff that comes out in the world is the stuff that I feel like we should look to promote online and in that sort of forum.
That thing of like promoting things, whether it's a church or if you've got a friend who's got like their own business, or my other job, I work for a charity, and I'm very aware of like the lovely friends and family that share my posts all the time, because it promotes it to a wider audience. It gets your message out there. And that's actually a really lovely thing, particularly if you can't afford to, you know, support your friend's business or organisation or whatever financially. That's actually your way of like promoting them and spreading the joy.
It's like word of mouth, isn't it?
Yeah. Actually, you have a lot of power with your likes and shares of promoting certain messages and getting good things out there. And so it's important to do that and to share and to promote people and what they're doing.
I think a lot of younger people now are more comfortable sharing their faith in Jesus online than they are in person, and that's quite interesting. Why do you think that might be?
For me, certainly, it's easier to, not that I include myself in young people these days, but it's certainly easier to share a sermon on my Facebook account. You don't even have to put a comment next to it if you don't want to, than it is to just walk up to your friend in person and go, hey, do you want to come to church with me? There's far fewer barriers to doing it, and so, well, we should be doing that in person, and I need to get better at that. You know, why not do it where it's easy, and maybe it's your jumping off point to being better at talking about faith in person, and that might start more conversations in person, because someone say, oh, I saw something on your Facebook feed the other day. So
just as we finish, just want to throw out a few challenges around social media.
Hit me.
So first one, we've not talked about it so much, but around usage. So I said at the beginning, people use social media a lot. Maybe this week, keep a log of how much you use social media. And you can even get apps that will track it for you, and ask yourself at the end of the week, am I happy with how much I'm using social media? Because some of us might be quite surprised at how much that is.
I have an app on my phone called Digital Wellbeing, actually, and it tracks what you're using. It will set time limits on all the websites and apps that you don't want to use. So if you say, I only want to be on Instagram for 20 minutes a day, it will kick you off Instagram.
Oh, really?
It turns the blue light on your phone grey after a certain time period.
Second challenge, review what you post online. So the thing is, obviously social media keeps a record of what you've said going back years, perhaps even in an embarrassing way, years back. Why don't you at some point look back over the things that you've posted over the last 6 months to a year, and do you like what you said? Would you say it in person? What do you think God would think about what you've said? And third challenge, very simply, why don't you share something really life-affirming and positive on social media this week? You may already do that generally anyway, or you may not, but why not use the opportunity this week just to share something really life-affirming and positive and great, and see what effect that has. So as we finish, I'll just pray, and we'll go from there. Father, thank you for this conversation. Thank you for the tool that social media can be. And as a church, we want to be better at using it. Between us as a church, we must spend hundreds of hours on social media every week. And we want it to be a forum and a context where we represent you really well, in all the different ways that looks, whether that's being honest about ourselves, whether that's affirming and encouraging other people, whether that's speaking truth when it needs to be spoken, and whether that's just very simply sharing why we love you and why we follow Jesus so much. Please help us be a people that represent you in all of the ways that we should. And we pray that Christians in our church and beyond would increasingly become a force for good on all forms of social media. Amen.
Amen.